Story 1. My family and I were just trying to enjoy a simple road trip, and we ended up in the most terrifying fight of our lives. I still can't believe this happened. So, for some context, it was me, 19 years old male, my dad, 45 years old, my mom, 42 years old, and my little sister, 14 years old. We had been driving for a few hours on some back roads through the mountains, just trying to enjoy the scenery. The highway was mostly empty, except for the occasional truck or another car passing by. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. We were cruising at about 60 when I noticed headlights coming up fast behind us. Like, way too fast. Before we knew it, this rusty, beat-up pickup truck was tailgating us so closely, I swear I could see the driver's wild eyes in the rearview mirror. My dad, being the level-headed guy he is, just muttered, "All right, buddy, calm down," and switched lanes to let him pass. But he didn't. Instead, this guy, a wiry, sunburnt dude with long, greasy hair and a look in his eyes that can only be described as wrong, pulled up beside us, keeping pace. He was staring into our car, his lips moving like he was talking to himself. Then out of nowhere, he jerked his wheel toward us. My dad swerved hard to avoid getting clipped, and that's when we lost control. We went off the road. The tires hit gravel, the car spun, and the world flipped. I remember my sister screaming, my mom yelling my dad's name, and the horrifying weightless feeling as we left the pavement. We crashed through a fence and finally came to a violent, shuddering stop in a ditch. For a second, everything was still. Then, before any of us could even process what had just happened, we heard the sound of an engine roaring back to life. The psycho had pulled over, and he was coming for us. Dad groaned as he unbuckled. "Everyone okay?" We were shaken up, but miraculously not injured. My mom was crying, my sister was shaking, and I could feel my own heartbeat pounding in my throat. But before we could even think about calling for help, the sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel filled the night air. Then, we heard his voice. "You ruined my truck!" the guy spat, his voice a mix of slurred rage and unsettling glee. "You think you can just drive like that? You think you can run?" Run? He was the one who had nearly killed us. But when my dad stepped out of the car, I saw something shift in his face. He knew, just like I did. This guy wasn't just mad. He was gone. There was something in his eyes that didn't belong to a sane person. Dad raised his hands, trying to de-escalate. "Look, man, let's just call it even. You almost ran us off the road, That's when the guy pulled out a knife. "Even?" he hissed, stepping closer. "Nah, I don't like loose ends." Something about the way he said that sent ice through my veins. I could see my mom clutching my sister's arm inside the car, her phone in her trembling hands as she dialed 911. The guy lunged. Dad barely dodged in time. The blade sliced through his jacket as he stumbled back, but before the psycho could go for another stab, I acted purely on instinct. I tackled him. We hit the ground hard. I'm not gonna lie. I was scared out of my mind, but adrenaline took over. I managed to grab his wrist, forcing the knife away, but the guy was strong. Too strong for someone who looked like a half-starved drifter. He thrashed like an animal, snarling and cursing, trying to bite me. Dad jumped in, grabbing the guy's other arm. Together, we managed to wrestle the knife away, but he didn't stop. He just kept fighting, screaming the whole time. "I'm gonna kill you! I'm gonna cut your whole family open!" No matter how much we hit him, no matter how many times he got slammed into the dirt, he just wouldn't go down. His nose was broken, his lip was split, but he was still thrashing, clawing, his eyes wild with pure hatred. "You think this is over?" he shrieked, his breath ragged and manic. "You think—" Dad finally managed to get him in a chokehold, and for a second, he went limp. Not unconscious, just still. Then, in the creepiest voice I've ever heard, he giggled. "Just wait," he whispered. "I'll find you." I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed the roll of duct tape from our emergency kit in the trunk and started wrapping his wrists together. Dad helped, and within a minute, we had him tied up like some kind of rabid animal. Even then, he kept growling, his fingers twitching like he was imagining wrapping them around our throats. It took the cops 20 minutes to get there. And the whole time, the guy never stopped talking. He whispered the most vile, graphic things you could imagine. He described, in detail, how he would gut us all, how he would wait until we thought we were safe before coming back for us. Even with his face half swollen from the beating, even tied up, he acted like he had already won. When the police finally arrived, they recognized him. Immediately. Turns out, he had a record, assault, battery, even a missing persons case linked to him. They threw him in the back of the cruiser, but as they drove off, he pressed his bloody face against the window and mouthed 2 words at me. "Still coming." I don't think I'll ever forget that. So yeah, we were just trying to have a normal family road trip, and instead, we ended up fighting a full-blown psychopath in the middle of nowhere. We're safe now. But I still get anxiety during road trips. Because the way he said those last words, I don't think he was lying. Story 2. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female, about 120 pounds soaking wet. I've never been the kind of person to panic easily, but what happened to me last night made my blood run cold. I was driving home from a weekend trip to visit my parents, taking the back roads because I wanted to avoid highway traffic. It was late, probably close to midnight, and the only light came from my headlights and the moon overhead. The road stretched on forever, empty and silent. No houses, no gas stations, just miles of nothing. Then, out of nowhere, my tire blew. I felt the car jerk to one side, the steering wheel shuddering in my grip. I managed to pull over, heart pounding. When I got out to check, my stomach dropped, completely flat. I had a spare, but I'd never actually changed a tire before. Still, I figured I'd try. I popped the trunk, pulled out the jack, and was fumbling around, trying to remember what I'd seen in YouTube tutorials, when I heard something. Footsteps. I froze. I hadn't heard a car pull up. No engine, no headlights. Just the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. Every hair on my body stood on end. I turned around, my breath catching in my throat. A man stood just a few feet away. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, with a lean, wiry frame that somehow still looked wrong, like he was stretched too thin. His face was mostly hidden under the brim of a faded baseball cap, but what I could see made my stomach twist. His lips were curled into the kind of smile that wasn't meant to be friendly. I had no idea where he came from. There were no cars in sight, no houses, just endless road and darkness. "You need some help there?" His voice was raspy, like he smoked a pack a day. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to get in my car and lock the doors. But my tire was flat. My phone had barely any battery, and I was completely alone. I forced a tight smile. "I think I got it, but thanks." He took a step closer. "Nah," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Pretty little thing. Like, you shouldn't be out here all by yourself? A lot of bad people in the world?" I gripped the tire iron tighter. "I really got it," I said, firmer this time. Another step closer. His eyes flicked to my hands, then to my car. He was assessing, like he was trying to decide if I was worth the trouble. Then he lunged. I stumbled back, but he was too fast. His fingers clamped around my wrist hard enough to bruise. "Let go of me!" I yelled, trying to wrench free. That grin widened. "Relax," he murmured. "Ain't nobody around to hear ya." Panic flooded my veins. My mind was racing, trying to think of anything I could do. I lifted the tire iron, ready to swing, but before I could, the roar of an engine tore through the night. Bright headlights bathed the road, and for the first time, I felt something close to hope. A massive 18-wheeler was barreling down the road toward us. I didn't think. I just started waving, frantically, screaming, "Help! Please!" The truck's brakes screeched, and the rig slowed as it pulled over just a few yards away. The second the door swung open, the man let go of me. He took a step back, his face shifting from predatory to unreadable. And then, just like that, he turned and walked into the darkness. I didn't see where he went. No car, no sound. He was just gone. A burly trucker climbed down from the cab, his boots hitting the pavement with a solid thud. He looked to be in his late 50s, built like a damn grizzly bear. He took one look at me, shaking, barely able to breathe, and his expression hardened. "You all right, miss?" I nodded, but my body was betraying me, trembling uncontrollably. He followed my gaze toward the darkness where the man had disappeared, then turned back to me. "You know him?" "No," I whispered. "He just appeared." The trucker's jaw clenched. He reached into his cab, pulled out a flashlight, and shined it toward the shoulder. Nothing. No movement. No sound. "That ain't right," he muttered. He stayed with me as I finished changing my tire, keeping watch the entire time. When I was done, he followed me to the nearest gas station just to make sure I got there safely. I never saw the man again. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I get this feeling, like something just out of sight is watching, and I don't take the back roads anymore. Story 3. I don't know why we decided to take the back roads. Maybe we wanted adventure. Maybe we were just tired of traffic and endless highways. Either way, it was a mistake. One we wouldn't forget. It was early October, and my girlfriend, Emily, and I were on a road trip, heading toward the mountains for a weekend getaway. The GPS had rerouted us down an old road, Black Hollow Road, according to the rusted street sign we passed. No streetlights, no houses, just miles of thick forest on both sides, swallowing the road in darkness. That's when the car sputtered. At first, I thought it was a hiccup. Maybe the road was just uneven. But then the engine gave out completely. The dashboard lights flickered once before everything went black. The car slowed, rolling to a dead stop in the middle of nowhere. I turned the key. Nothing. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. Emily shifted in her seat, glancing out the window. "What happened?" "I don't know. The engine just died." I tried again. Still nothing. Emily checked her phone. No service. Of course, just our luck. I exhaled slowly, trying to think. "All right, we'll sleep here and walk to the nearest town in the morning. It's gotta be a few miles back." Emily hesitated. "You sure? You want to walk in the dark?" I gestured outside. "With no signal?" She sighed. "Guess not." We locked the doors, leaving the emergency flashers on, in case some kind soul passed by. But the longer we sat in that dead, silent car, the more the forest around us seemed to close in. Then we heard it. A long, low howl. Emily stiffened. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Then another howl, closer, followed by rustling in the trees. Something was moving. Multiple somethings. Emily reached for my arm. "Tell me that's just coyotes." I swallowed hard. "I don't think so." A shape darted between the trees, a large, shadowy figure, barely visible in the moonlight. Then another, and another. A pack. Wolves. They moved unnaturally silent, their glowing eyes catching the light from the flashers. One padded out onto the road, stopping a few feet from the car. It was massive, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. Its fur was thick, dark, and its eyes, something about them felt wrong. It stared at us, studying us. Then, slowly, it smiled. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. "Did that thing just—" Before she could finish, another slammed against the side of the car. We both screamed. The whole vehicle rocked from the impact. Claws scraped against the windows. They weren't just curious. They were testing us. Jesus Christ. I scrambled to check the doors. Locked. The pack circled, growling, their bodies flickering in and out of sight like ghosts. One leapt onto the hood, its breath fogging up the windshield as it stared at us, unblinking. Then, crack. I turned just in time to see the back passenger window splinter as another wolf lunged at it. Emily was sobbing now, gripping my arm so tight I thought she'd break it. They're going to get in. I forced myself to think. We just have to make it till morning. They'll leave when the sun comes up. How do you know that? I don't, I admitted. But we don't have a choice. The wolves weren't just attacking blindly. They were coordinating, taking turns, pacing. They knew we were trapped. They were enjoying this. The longest night minutes stretched into hours. We sat frozen, barely breathing as they circled, pressed against the car, their hot breath fogging the glass. Scratching, waiting. At some point, exhaustion took over. I must have drifted in and out, because the next thing I knew, Emily was shaking me. "The lights," she whispered. I blinked. The hazard lights were dying. One flickered, then the other. Then, darkness. And in that moment, the wolves went silent. No more growling, no more scratching, just stillness. They were waiting. I barely had time to react before the roof dented inward. Something had jumped onto the car. The ceiling groaned, metal bending under the weight. Claws dragged across it, slow and deliberate. Emily was hyperventilating. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" I grabbed her hand, my mind racing. We couldn't stay in the car anymore. If we did, we were dead. "We make a run for it," I whispered. "Are you insane? They'll get in. We wait. We die here." She was shaking her head, but she knew I was right. The roof creaked again. If we were gonna run, it had to be now. I counted to 3. Then we threw the doors open and ran. The chase. The moment our feet hit the pavement, they came alive. A chorus of growls erupted behind us. Pounding footsteps. They were chasing us. Emily screamed, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the trees. Maybe we could lose them in the forest. Branches whipped against my face. Leaves crunched beneath us. I could hear them right behind us, panting, snarling, closing in. Then, headlights. A pair of blinding high, beams cutting through the night. A deep rumble of an approaching engine. A truck. I didn't think. I ran straight into the road, waving my arms like a madman. The truck skidded to a stop, and the driver's door burst open. A man, mid-50s, burly, wearing a worn-out flannel, jumped down, shotgun in hand. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, the wolf skidded to a halt at the tree line. The lead wolf, the one that had smiled at us, stepped forward. It locked eyes with the trucker. And then, it grinned. Not at us. At him. The trucker's face went pale, like he knew something we didn't, like he'd seen them before. "Get in the truck," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We didn't hesitate. We bolted for the cab as he lifted the shotgun. The lead wolf gave him one last look, something almost human in its gaze, before turning back into the woods. The rest followed, melting into the shadows. Gone. Just like that. The trucker climbed in after us, his face grim as he put the truck in gear. "You kids got lucky," he muttered. Emily clutched my arm. What the hell were those things? The trucker didn't answer right away. He just stared ahead, his hands tight on the wheel. Then, he sighed. "Next time," he said, his voice low. "Stay off Black Hollow Road." He never explained, and we never asked. Story 4. Graduation was supposed to be the start of something new, something exciting. That's what we kept telling ourselves as we packed into Jordan's car, the 5 of us crammed together, bags stuffed in the trunk, music blasting. A road trip before we all went our separate ways. It was supposed to be one last adventure. But now, I wish we had never left. The last normal thing I remember was stopping at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. We were laughing, stretching our legs, grabbing snacks. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and fried food from the diner next door. I remember feeling uneasy, though. Something about the place was off. That's when I saw him. A man standing near the pumps, just watching us. He wasn't getting gas, wasn't talking to anyone, just staring. His clothes looked dirty, like he'd been living on the road, and his face was blank, unreadable. His eyes locked on us, unblinking. I nudged Jordan and whispered, "That guy's creeping me out." Jordan shrugged. "Relax, dude, just some weirdo." I tried to shake it off, but when we pulled out of the station, I noticed headlights behind us. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just another car on the road. But miles passed, and he never turned off. Hours later, the road had become nothing but dark trees and endless highway. That's when it happened. The headlights surged forward, the roar of an engine. A sudden, violent impact. The car spun. Screams filled the air. Trees blurred past as we careened off the road. Then, blackness. When I woke up, everything hurt. The car was wrecked, tilted against a tree, the front crushed like a soda can. Jordan was slumped over the wheel, unconscious but breathing. The others groaned, shaken, but alive. And we weren't alone. The woods were silent. Too silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the distant sound of something moving. Branches cracking underfoot. Then we saw it. A tripwire, just inches from where we had stumbled out of the car. And beyond it, more traps. Spikes hidden beneath leaves, pits disguised with branches, wires strung between trees. Every direction we turned, traps. It was a setup. Panic set in fast. "Who the hell did this?" Rachel whispered, her voice shaking. That's when I remembered the man. The one from the gas station. The way he watched us. The way he followed us. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. We were meant to be here. I turned in a slow circle, my heart pounding. "This was planned," I said, barely above a whisper. "From the beginning." From somewhere deep in the trees came the sound of footsteps. Slow, steady, coming for us. And there was no way out. We had no choice but to move. Carefully. Every step had to be calculated. The moment Jordan regained consciousness, we half-carried him through the trees, avoiding the traps as best we could. But whoever set them knew what they were doing. The ground was a minefield. Rachel nearly stepped into a pit full of sharpened stakes. I caught her just in time. Chris tripped over a hidden wire, and a rusted bear trap snapped shut inches from his leg. Our luck was running out. Then came the laughter. Low, guttural, coming from the darkness. And the footsteps. Faster now. Closing in. "They're hurting us," I realized, my voice barely more than a breath. Pushing us somewhere. We had to think. Fast. That's when I saw it. The wreckage of an old, rusted pickup, half buried beneath overgrown weeds. A glint of something in the back seat. A flare gun. I lunged for it, gripping the cold metal, my fingers shaking as I checked it. One shot. That was all we had. The footsteps stopped. Then, a voice. Low, ragged, amused. "Run all you want," it said. "You ain't getting out." Number I raised the flare gun and fired into the sky. A brilliant red light exploded above us, casting long shadows through the trees. For the first time I saw them. More than one. Figures standing between the trees. Watching. Waiting. Then, sirens. The distant wail of police approaching fast. The figures hesitated. The game was over. Rachel grabbed my arm. "Run!" We ran. Through the darkness. Through the traps. Through the suffocating fear. We ran until the flashing red and blue lights cut through the trees, until officers burst into the woods, guns drawn. And then, it was over. They never caught them. The men, whoever they were, vanished into the trees before the cops arrived. The traps were dismantled. The road was searched, but no evidence, no bodies, no explanation. Just the wreckage. Just us. The police called it an unidentified criminal operation, like that meant anything. Like it explained why. I never told them about the man at the gas station, about how he had been watching us, about how I knew he had orchestrated the whole thing. Because deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't random. We were meant to be there, and whoever they were, they would do it again.